In 1969, a United States Air Force captain named Carl Polifka flew his small single-engine Cessna 01 Bird Dog over the plain of Jars in northern Laos at an altitude of 500 feet, looking for North Vietnamese supply columns to direct airstrikes against. He was wearing civilian clothes. He carried no military identification. His aircraft had no military markings. If he was shot down and captured, the United States government would not acknowledge that he existed or that he had been doing what he was doing in a country where American combat operations were officially not taking place. He had been briefed on this before his first mission. He had accepted the terms. He flew anyway. Polifka was a Raven, one of approximately 200 American military pilots who served as forward air controllers in Laos between 1966 and 1973 under a CIA program so secret that its existence was denied to Congress for years. 19 of them did not come home. Their names were not on any official casualty list for a very long time. In some cases, their families were told stories that were not true. The war they fought was a war that officially never happened, and the price they paid for fighting it was paid in a currency the government declined to count. The secret war in Laos was one of the most extensive covert operations in American history, and it was secret in a specific and deliberate way. The 1962 Geneva Accords had declared Laos a neutral country and prohibited foreign military forces from operating on its soil. The United States signed the accords. The North Vietnamese also signed them and immediately violated them, continuing to use the Ho Chi Minh Trail network that ran through eastern Laos as the primary supply route for their forces in South Vietnam. The CIA's response, developed over the following years under Station Chief Ted Shackley and his successors, was to build and support an indigenous fighting force, the Royal Lao Army and the Hmong Guerrilla Army, commanded by General Vang Pao, that could contest NVA operations in Laos without requiring the presence of American uniformed military personnel in acknowledged combat roles. The arrangement maintained the fiction of American compliance with the Geneva Accords while conducting a war that consumed billions of dollars and tens of thousands of lives. Long Tieng was the operational center of the secret war. Located in a narrow valley in the mountains of Sheng Quang Province, accessible only by air, Long Tieng was in the early 1970s the second busiest airport in the world by number of daily aircraft movements. It was also one of the most secret installations on Earth. It did not appear on any publicly available map. Its coordinates were classified. The CIA's Air America and Continental Air Services operated out of it daily, flying supplies, troops, and ammunition to Hmong positions throughout northern Laos. The Hmong soldiers who fought from Long Tieng, recruited, trained, and armed by the CIA, sustained casualties over the course of the secret war that by some estimates amounted to a significant fraction of the entire Hmong male population of military age. They fought because Vang Pao asked them to, because the CIA paid them to, and because the North Vietnamese army represented a genuine existential threat to their communities that predated American involvement. The Ravens arrived at Long Tieng, beginning in 1966, to fill a specific tactical gap. The forward air controllers who directed American airstrikes in South Vietnam were uniformed Air Force officers operating under established rules of engagement with established communication procedures and established relationships with the ground units they supported. In Laos, there were no American ground units to support. There were Hmong guerrillas and Royal Lao Army soldiers who spoke little or no English, operating in terrain that was not adequately mapped, against NVA units that moved at night and dispersed during daylight to avoid the airstrikes that were the primary American contribution to the ground war. What was needed was a small number of pilots who could fly low and slow in light aircraft, speak enough Lao or Hmong to communicate with the ground commanders, navigate by terrain recognition in mountainous jungle with inadequate maps, and direct strikes with precision sufficient to hit targets that were often within meters of friendly positions. The Air Force had no official program for this. The CIA created one. The selection process for Ravens was informal by the standards of any official military program, and rigorous by the standards of what it was actually selecting for. Pilots were approached individually, usually by a current Raven or a CIA officer, and offered a voluntary assignment to a program whose details could not be fully disclosed. They were told that the work was dangerous, that it was classified, that it would require them to operate outside the normal military support structure, and that if they said yes, they would be temporarily assigned to the embassy in Vientiane as air attachés, a cover that provided thin legal protection and no practical protection at all. The pilots who said yes tended to be a specific type. They were good aviators who found the conventional Air Force limiting. They were men who were drawn to the specific combination of autonomy, risk, and consequence that the Raven mission offered. They were, in some cases, men who had already been to Vietnam in conventional roles and had found the bureaucracy of large unit operations frustrating in ways that operating alone over Laos would not be. A Raven's typical day began before dawn at Long Tieng, or one of the forward operating locations scattered through the mountains of northern Laos. He would brief with the Hmong ground commanders, usually through an interpreter or in the rudimentary Lao he had picked up, to understand the previous night's situation and the day's priorities. He would take off in his O-1 or later in the more capable Cessna T-41 or Pilatus Porter, flying into terrain that changed daily as the dry season allowed NVA movement that the monsoon would later restrict. He would fly at altitudes that made him visible to ground fire because finding targets required flying low enough to see them. He would mark targets with smoke rockets, talk strike aircraft onto them using radio frequencies that connected him to F-105s and F-4s flying from Thailand or carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin, and then assess the damage and decide whether to call for another pass. He would do this for hours, landing to refuel at forward strips that were frequently under mortar fire, and then go back up. On a busy day, he might fly 4 or 5 sorties. At the end of the day, he would debrief with the CIA case officers who ran the operational program and then eat, sleep, and prepare to do it again. The aircraft they flew were not designed for the role they were performing. The O-1 Bird Dog was a 1950s liaison aircraft with a single 213 horsepower engine, fabric-covered control surfaces, and no armor. It cruised at approximately 115 miles per hour and stalled at 42. A man with a rifle could shoot one down. NVA anti-aircraft gunners with 37mm and 57mm weapons, of which there were many in northern Laos, could destroy one at distances the pilot could not see. The Ravens knew this. They flew the aircraft low enough to find targets, which meant they flew low enough to be hit, which meant they developed a specific relationship with probability and survival that changed a man's thinking about both. Captain Fred Platt flew 206 combat missions in Laos before being shot down in 1970. He survived. He went back and flew more. The losses were significant for a program of 200 men operating over 7 years. 19 Ravens were killed in Laos. An additional number were wounded and evacuated. Several were shot down, survived the immediate crash, and were rescued through the Air America network that was the secret war's logistical backbone. The recovery operations for downed pilots were themselves extraordinary exercises in improvised courage, involving Air America helicopters flying into active anti-aircraft fire to recover men who could not be allowed to fall into NVA hands because what they knew about the program's operations was too sensitive to risk exposure. Captain Fred Anton was shot down over the plain of Jars in 1971. His O-1 took a direct hit from ground fire, and he survived the crash landing in a rice paddy. He had approximately 20 minutes before NVA soldiers would reach his position. The CIA's rescue network, coordinated from Long Tieng, directed an Air America helicopter to his coordinates. The helicopter came in under fire. Anton was pulled out with NVA soldiers visible at the tree line. The entire rescue took 11 minutes. Anton was flying again within a week. This was not unusual. Men who were shot down, recovered, and returned to flying did so because the program needed them, and because the particular character that had brought them to Laos in the first place did not easily accept the alternative of stopping. The Hmong soldiers and civilians who were the ultimate beneficiaries and the ultimate victims of the secret war occupy a different position in this history than the Ravens, and it would be dishonest to tell the Ravens' story without acknowledging the asymmetry. The Ravens flew dangerous missions, took real risks, and some of them died. The Hmong who fought alongside them were destroyed as a community. General Vang Pao's army at its peak numbered approximately 40,000 men. By the time the program ended with the 1973 Paris Peace Accords and the subsequent collapse of the Royal Lao government, the Hmong had suffered casualties that some estimates place at 30,000 killed over the course of the war. When Long Tieng fell to Pathet Lao and NBA forces in 1975, Vang Pao was evacuated to Thailand by CIA aircraft. Hundreds of thousands of Hmong fled into the jungle or across the Mekong River into Thailand. Those who could not flee were subject to reprisals that continued for years. The secret war that the CIA had built around their fighting capacity left them without the American support that had made their resistance possible, and without any protection against the consequences of having provided it. The Ravens who survived came home to a country that did not know what they had done, and a military bureaucracy that was uncertain how to account for it. Their classified service records referenced their cover assignments rather than their actual activities. The combat decorations some of them had earned for Laos operations were awarded through mechanisms that obscured the context of the actions being recognized. The Air Force, which had loaned them to the CIA program and maintained their official careers in parallel with their actual service, was not eager to publicize the details of operations that had been conducted in violation of American treaty obligations. The existence of the Raven program became more widely known in the 1980s, primarily through the work of journalist Christopher Robbins, whose book The Ravens was published in 1987 and remained the definitive account of the program for decades. Robbins had interviewed surviving Ravens and had obtained access to materials that allowed him to reconstruct the program's operations with a specificity that official channels had declined to provide. The book received attention and was praised by reviewers. It did not produce a government acknowledgment of the program's existence or a formal recognition of the men who had served in it. The Ravens Forward Air Controller Association maintains a roster of the men who served and the 19 who died. The names of the dead are on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, listed under the official cover designations that obscured their actual assignments. They are among the 58,279. The wall does not distinguish between a man who died in an acknowledged war and a man who died in a war that his government spent years pretending had not happened. It gives them all the same size letters, the same black granite, the same reflection of the sky. Some of the surviving Ravens are still alive, in their 70s and 80s, carrying the specific knowledge of what they did and where they did it and what it cost the people they had been sent to help. The Hmong community in the United States, concentrated in Minnesota, California, and Wisconsin, carries the other side of that knowledge. The two communities rarely discuss it together. The war that officially never happened left consequences that very officially did. There is a video on screen right now about the other secret operations the CIA ran in Southeast Asia and what they cost the people who executed them and the people who depended on them. Subscribe. The wars that governments deny are usually the ones that most deserve examination.